Welcome back to the Boston Banter, where we dive deep into the lives of individuals, achievements, adversities, embarrassments, affairs. Who knows the lives of people who shaped our world today? I'm Joelle.
And I'm Tomer. Today we're talking about the fascinating tale of Robert Gould Shaw, the man whose name is forever linked with the 54th Massachusetts Regiment during the Civil War.
And a couple boarding schools.
Anyway,
let's get started. Born on October 10th, 1837 in Boston, he came into the world as part of one of the wealthiest families in America, Lucky Duck. His parents, Francis and Sarah Shaw, were intellectuals, staunch Unitarians, and active members of the American Anti-Slavery Society.
Right. And you'd think growing up in a family of abolitionists would mean Shaw shared those views from the start, but that wasn't the case.
Not at all. Robert initially didn't agree with the idea of abolishing slavery. In fact, he pushed back against the very ideas his family stood for. But life has a funny way of changing your perspective, even if you're a Nepo baby.
Absolutely. Let's start with his childhood. Growing up, he had an older sister, Anna, and 3 younger sisters, Josephine, Susanna, and Ellen. That's 2v6.
Their family was close, and they had a lot of company. A lot of company. Try 85 first cousins and playmates like the children of William Lloyd Garrison, one of the most famous abolitionists of the time.
More Nepo babies. The Shaws moved around a bit and attended church every Sunday, no matter where they were. When they lived in Long Island for a period of time, they drove all the way to Brooklyn to go to church. But young Robert struggled to find his footing, especially when it came to school.
He really didn't like his boarding school. He went to a couple in America, but the fam got bored, and he wrote some sad letters home. So the family took a lengthy trip to Europe.
As one does.
And while he was there, they sent him to schools in Switzerland and Germany, but he couldn't settle. But then, it was turning up. He got accepted into Harvard.
Looks like life was really turning up for Shaw.
Well, when he went to Harvard,
he hated it. He once wrote to his mother, "I hate Cambridge." He dropped out before finishing and decided to travel across Europe even more instead.
That's fun. It was during his time in Europe that something shifted. Shaw began to hear anti-American sentiments from some Europeans, and it sparked a sense of patriotism in him. He wrote to his parents about his growing sense of loyalty to his country and even considered joining West Point or the Navy.
His parents, knowing his struggles with authority and taking orders, being the Nepo baby he is, didn't take those ambitions too seriously.
But they should have, because when the Civil War broke out, everything changed. Shaw found purpose in fighting for the Union.
That's right. This is the period where Robert transitions from a privileged, aimless young man into a disciplined and committed soldier. It's not just about the battles he fought, but the personal transformation that would ultimately define his legacy.
Robert returned to the United States just as tensions between the North and South were boiling over. He first joined the 7th New York Infantry, which was tasked with protecting Washington, D.C.
Were the parents surprised?
Surprised they were, but it didn't last long.
The 7th Infantry service was short-lived, only about 30 days before it disbanded. At this point, Robert was still trying to find his footing, but when the 7th fell apart, he just YOLO'd it and joined the 2nd Massachusetts Infantry for a 2nd lieutenant.
And this was a big moment for him.
I've asked around, and some people note that Robert really started to come into his own during his time with the 2nd Infantry. This one guy described him as a good soldier who followed orders and expected the same from others. He could be counted on when bullets flew and rebels yelled.
It's fascinating to think about how far Robert had come by this point. Remember, this was the same young man that was once described as a petulant and self-absorbed Nepo baby.
But now in the thick of war, he was proving to be a disciplined and reliable soldier serving his country.
How dutiful. But Tomer, did he actually fight?
Yes, as a matter of fact. He proved himself in some of the most significant battles of the Civil War, like Cedar Mountain and Antietam. But let's not skip ahead just yet. What's interesting is how Robert reacted to the idea of joining the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, where he was approached by Governor John A. Andrew, a staunch abolitionist, about taking on a leadership role in what would become one of the first regiments of black soldiers. He was pretty hesitant.
That's true. He was initially doubtful about leaving his comrades in the 2nd Infantry to lead a regiment he wasn't sure would ever see action. At the time, there were serious doubts about how black soldiers would be utilized in combat, or if they would even be allowed to fight at all.
And you can imagine how conflicted Robert must have felt.
On one hand, he had a strong sense of loyalty to his old regiment.
On the other hand, this was an opportunity to do something groundbreaking, something that could change the course of the war and history.
Something never done before. It was a turning point for Robert, no doubt. With some push from his parents, he accepted the commission. And here's where it gets interesting.
On February 13, 1863, Robert Gould Shaw became the second-in-command leader of the 54th Massachusetts Infantry, the first all-black regiment officially formed in the Union Army after President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation allowed states to create such units.
It's so crazy that proclamation got passed.
Yeah, Joelle, that's our next episode. Stay tuned, guys. Anyway,
the creation of the 54th Massachusetts Regiment was groundbreaking. It wasn't just a military decision. It was a political and moral statement.
At first, Shaw took the position somewhat reluctantly, reportedly agreeing to appease his mother.
How many people haven't done something because his mom said so?
Apparently Robert. It was an interesting choice, considering he married Annie Kneeland Haggerty 26 days before he deployed. But something shifted as he began training his men, and his motivation changed. He came to deeply respect their intelligence, dedication, and courage.
First of all, what a name. But did you know that when he learned that black soldiers were to receive less pay than whites, Shaw led a boycott of all wages until the situation was changed? He really did value his black comrades.
Wow, I did not know that. Fascinating.
He even wrote to his father, saying, "The intelligence of the men is a great surprise to me. It is not a doubt that we will leave the state with as good regiment as any that has marched." Don't ask how I know that.
On May 28, 1863, the 54th Massachusetts Regiment had its grand moment. Over 1,000 black soldiers and 37 white officers marched triumphantly through Boston to the docks, cheered on by crowds. They boarded ships bound for South Carolina, a moment full of hope and purpose.
And it was downhill from there.
Unfortunately, the regiment's journey wasn't smooth. Their first months in service were marked by frustration. Instead of seeing combat, they were assigned to manual labor duties and raids, including a deeply troubling event in Darien, Georgia. What a mess it was. The Darien raid was a moral crisis for Shaw. His superior, Colonel James Montgomery, ordered the town to be burned to the ground. Shaw initially refused, but ultimately had no authority to stop the destruction.
And this event haunted him. He later wrote, "In theory, it may seem all right to some, but when it comes to being made the instruction of the Lord's vengeance, I myself don't like it." He also feared the raid would be used as ammunition by critics of all black regiments and disband the team he has become so close with.
So he gave up?
Nope. Shaw didn't let the disillusionment break him. Instead, he became even more determined to prove he was worth his regiment. By July 1863, he had an opportunity to do just that and prove themselves. Shaw asked for the honor of leading the 54th Regiment in the charge against Fort Wagner, a heavily fortified Confederate stronghold in Charleston Harbor.
That is bold.
He knew the risks. The attacks was almost certain to fail, but he also knew the symbolism.
Black soldiers leading the charge against Charleston, the heart of the Confederacy, would be a powerful statement, both for the Union cause and for the future of African Americans in the military, but it's also a death sentence.
And that it was. The assault on Fort Wagner took place on July 18, 1863. As the 54th approached the fort, Shaw, the ever leader, was at the front of the line.
He puffed out his chest, shouted to his men, "Forward, 54th, forward!" Even as casualties mounted and chaos erupted around them, Shaw and his men pushed on.
Thanks for the imagery, Tomer. You're right, he was fearless. Shaw led a small group of soldiers up the parapet, the fort's outer wall, under relentless Confederate fire.
And he destroyed the fort and went home to his wife and parents, and it was a happily ever after. Unfortunately, that's not how the tale ends. It was there on the parapet that he was shot multiple times and killed. His death was tragic, but his bravery and that of the 54th was undeniable. Though the Union ultimately failed to take Fort Wagner that day, the regiment's courage proved to the world that black soldiers could fight as bravely and as fiercely as any others.
The 54th suffered over 300 casualties in that battle, but their actions changed the course of history. The bravery displayed and at Fort Wagner helped pave the way for the acceptance of black soldiers in the Union Army. He is a legend.
Absolute legend. Shaw's leadership and sacrifice turned him into a symbol of the fight for equality and justice. But this story doesn't just end there. Here's where the drama emerges. I did some digging, Joelle, and...
What?
His body, alongside those of his men, was buried in a mass grave by Confederate forces, an act meant as an insult.
This is so rude.
Yup. Confederate General Johnson Hagood said, "We will not return his body to the Union Army. Let him lie in a common trench with his men."
To Hagood, this was an insult, I'm sure. Shaw, a white officer, leading black troops, was buried alongside them, an act intended to degrade both the men and his mission?
For some context, at the time, it was customary for white officers to be returned to their families for burial.
What a disgrace for his family.
Shaw's father actually took a different view. Shaw's father wrote, "We would not have his body removed from where it lies, surrounded by his brave and devoted soldiers. We can imagine no holier place than that in which he lies among his brave and devoted followers, nor wish for him better company. What a bodyguard he has."
They really stuck with their abolitionist views. Shaw's father saw his son's burial not as a dishonor, but as a testament to his sacrifice and solidarity with the men he fought alongside. That is beautiful.
I love this.
Well, that will be all here, I think. Thank you for watching.
And remember, history is not just about what happened, it's about what continues to teach us.
I'm Joelle.
And I'm Tomer.
See you next time on the Boston